I would argue that the most serious threat to the United States is not someone hiding in a cave in Afghanistan or Pakistan, but our own fiscal irresponsibility.
The President of the United States.
These United States are confronted with an economic affliction of great proportions.
America may be headed for a recession.
And I must say to you that the state of the Union is not good.
We are engaged in a long and hard fight against inflation.
Our trade deficit is too large.
Part of our trouble is that we have been self-indulgent, and now the bill has come due.
Unless we act forcefully, and now, the economy will get worse.
But I pledge to you tonight that the full powers of this government will be used to keep America's economy producing.
What we need is spending discipline in Washington, D.C.
And thus restore balance to our economy.
We will continue along the path toward a balanced budget.
Once it's balanced, we will start paying off the national debt.
And now we are on course for budget surpluses for the next 25 years.
But a stronger nation and economy requires more than a balanced budget.
Only a true partnership between government and the people can ever hope to reach these goals.
We must act today in order to preserve tomorrow.
We must solve problems, not leave them to future generations.
We won't leave it to our children and our grandchildren.
We must not go back to unwise spending.
We must strive to break the calamitous cycle and help dispel the uncertainty that so many feel about our economy.
And tonight, that cause goes on. God bless.
What hit the economy first was a housing slump. Fears spread to Wall Street. Consumers tightened their purse strings.
The U.S. Federal Reserve cut its key interest rate by half a point.
The I word, inflation, is coming to the fore.
Major developments on the lending crisis in the U.S. Oil and gold prices are spiking.
Nuclear strike here on our financial market.
And it's complicated because of where we are in the election cycle.
Huge disconnect between Wall Street and Main Street.
Who is David Walker and why should we care? He's the nation's top accountant, the Comptroller General of the United States. He's totaled up the government's income, liabilities, and future obligations and concluded that our current standard of living is unsustainable unless some drastic action is taken. And he's not alone.
I'm Dave Walker, Comptroller General of the United States. So I'm head of the U.S. Government Accountability Office, better known as the GAO. We're in the legislative branch of government. Basically, we're about improving transparency, enhancing government performance, and assuring accountability for the benefit of the American people. I was set to be career military, and I had appointments to the Naval and Air Force academies, but I couldn't go at the last minute because I have a bad left ear, and it kept me out of my military career. I knew it was only a matter of time before I decided to serve my country in some way, and I've been fortunate to have 3 presidential appointments, one from Reagan, one from Bush 41, and this one from Clinton. It's been a pleasure and an honor to serve my country.
We suffer from a fiscal cancer. It is growing within us. And if we do not treat it, it could have catastrophic consequences for our country.
How big is the federal debt?
I don't know.
I'm guessing quite a bit.
I wouldn't know that.
Like 3 million?
I know it's in the billions.
I have no idea.
If it's in the billions or trillions.
No, it's a heck of a lot more than it was probably 10 years ago.
Well, take a stab at it.
69 billion.
It's probably huge.
What if I told you it was $8.7 trillion?
That's pretty crazy. Wow. Shouldn't be that way.
$8.7 trillion. Just how much money is that? With a number this large, it helps to compare it to the overall size of America's economy, what economists call the gross domestic product, or GDP. In February 2007, when our federal debt was $8.7 trillion, our GDP was around $13.5 trillion. That meant that our federal debt was about 64% of our GDP. This level of debt to GDP is not the real problem. It's where we're headed that matters, and it's projected to get much worse in the future. In addition, as you'll find out soon, this $8.7 trillion number is only a fraction of our nation's total fiscal challenge.
Chairman Conrad, Senator Gregg, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to discuss solutions to the nation's long-term fiscal challenges.
I'm Robert Bixby, and I'm the Executive Director of the Concord Coalition. It's a nonpartisan organization, it's a grassroots organization, and we advocate fiscal responsibility. Well, our current fiscal policy is unsustainable. Most people from the left or the right agree on that. They may disagree on how to deal with it, but most people think that eventually the fiscal policy of the country is headed over a cliff. This is the federal budget for 1988. It's jam-packed with numbers, and it's got some descriptions in the beginning of the programs that the president was pushing. Here is the budget for 2005, for a couple of years ago. The main budget document it's got some numbers in it. It has pictures in it. There's a lot of color pictures in it and glossy paper and things. It's not what it used to be, where you just had numbers and some descriptions of the programs. It's kind of a metaphor for what's happened with federal government.
Here we go. If you just joined us, David Walker, who is Comptroller General of the U.S., is here in the studio with us. For the past few years, you've gone around the country on what you've called fiscal wake-up tours. Tell us what those are and why you're doing this.
There's a coalition of groups that has come together. The key players are the Concord Coalition, the Brookings Institution, the Heritage Foundation, and myself as Comptroller General of the United States. We have many other organizations that are involved as well, but those are the four cornerstones. What we're doing is we're going outside the Beltway to state the facts and speak the truth to the American people, to help them understand where we've been, where we are, where we're headed. Because my view is the only way that elected officials are going to make the tough choices is if the people understand the need for these choices and will not punish them for doing what's right for America's future. The facts aren't Democrat or Republican. The facts aren't liberal or conservative. The facts are the facts. And, you know, there's broad-based agreement among the Fiscal Wake-Up Tour participants that span the political spectrum, that our financial condition is worse than advertised, that we need to act soon because time is working against us. America faces four serious deficits today. The first is a budget deficit. The second is a savings deficit. The third is a balance of payments deficit, of which the trade deficit is a subset. And the fourth and most serious of all is a leadership deficit.
How can this be happening to the richest country in the world?
Well, we've lost our way, quite frankly. Let me tell you how we got to where we are. Today's federal debt is the sum of all of our annual budget deficits and surpluses going back to the beginning of our federal government. Our war for independence created much of our early debt, and by March 4th, 1789, the first day of our federal government, our national debt was $75 million, which was about 40% of our economy. This terrified our founding fathers, and they acted quickly to pay it down. We didn't stay there for long. The Civil War not only had a huge human cost, it brought the United States to the brink of bankruptcy. However, like before, we paid our debt down quickly. In 1913, the Federal Reserve System was created to help manage the nation's money supply and to oversee national banks. That year was also the birth of the modern income tax. World War I was supposed to be the war to end all wars. Several years later, the Great Depression brought with it extreme economic hardship for millions of Americans.
This Social Security measure gives at least some protection to 30 millions of our citizens.
It is insurance that you and your employer have bought and paid for.
World War II was a time of sacrifice. And while the government took on unprecedented levels of debt, Americans bought savings bonds to finance our winning the war.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Humphrey Bogart.
Our fighting men have just won history's greatest victory for freedom. Buy bonds for their future and for your own future.
We've got another bond to buy.
It's official. It's all over. It's total victory.
The large military and social spending practices of the 1960s and 70s were two key factors that led to a major economic downturn by the end of the 1970s. The 1980s saw the rise of supply-side economics.
It's morning again in America.
Reaganomics.
You're the trickle-down theory guy.
I'm betting my reputation on it.
The controversial Laffer curve proposed that lower marginal tax rates would eventually generate higher tax revenues. The theory did have its critics.
Let me just give you a difference that I have with Governor Reagan on taxes. It is what I call a voodoo economic policy.
For decades, we have piled deficit upon deficit, mortgaging our future and our children's future for the temporary convenience of the present.
Read my lips.
The debate over supply-side economics continues to this day. But what is not debatable is that the federal debt exploded in the 1980s. A fundamental shift had occurred. America was becoming addicted to debt. Never before in our history had so much debt been created during an era of relative peace and prosperity. Yes, the Cold War ended, but it came at an extremely high price, and people from across the political spectrum were becoming very alarmed.
You know, I lost a lot of weight when I was in college, deliberately, and back in those days, this was the drink, you know? Yeah. Back in 1992, Warren Rudman, a Republican senator, and Paul Tsongas, a Democratic presidential candidate, along with former Commerce Secretary Pete Peterson, founded the Concord Coalition because they were very concerned about the budget deficit at the time and also the long-term outlook.
And we believe that the Concord Coalition will be a powerful grassroots organization that will say to the politicians all across this country that the American people are ready for truth.
We are now borrowing 22 cents of every dollar that we're spending. And in effect, what we're doing is we're slipping this huge hidden check for our free lunch to our children and our grandchildren. And you ain't seen nothing yet.
This is the issue that the Concord Coalition was formed to address. So, yes, I do feel a particular responsibility to advance the cause. And, you know, things like this, like today's hearing, are just a great opportunity to do so. They don't come along all the time. Some people say, well, this is all gloom and doom. You know, you're talking about all these terrible numbers and statistics, and it's really, you know, if this were gloom and doom, we wouldn't be doing it. It's a lot like dieting. A budget is a diet. The only way you can really lose weight is to get more exercise or to eat less. There are really only two ways that you can balance a budget. You can cut spending or you can raise taxes. And people don't necessarily like those hard choices, so they look for easy solutions.
I especially want to welcome the really outstanding witnesses we have here today. Robert Bixby, the Executive Director of the Concord Coalition, that does such good work on trying to alert the nation as to the risks of our fiscal imbalances. Dr. Joe Minarek.
The Budget Committee, sort of think of it as mom and dad sitting around the kitchen table at the beginning of the year figuring out what we can afford. And everybody comes up to them with their ideas about the new things that the family needs, and they have to sort of look at how much income they're going to have and how much they can afford to spend. Well, the family hasn't been doing too well. We've been running deficits of $200 to $300 billion, which is quite a bit of money. We're involved, all of us here at this table, in the fiscal wake-up tour. Dave Walker is involved in that as well. And we've been going around the country holding town hall meetings and talking to the local media. And we are finding the public seems to be willing to hear the tough choices. What they want to make sure is that you're serious about them. I think everybody realizes that that sort of a family budget is unsustainable over the long term, and the family's going to be in a lot of trouble.
In the last 40 years, we've had 35 budget deficits and only 5 budget surpluses. But remember, we've been running large annual surpluses in our Social Security program for years. These surpluses are spent every year to help pay other bills in the federal government. Without the Social Security surpluses, our real track record on deficits looks a whole lot worse.
This is something that's utterly unsustainable. And remember, all of that has happened before the baby boomers retire. And the baby boomers are not a projection. They're born, they're out there, they're going to be eligible for Social Security and Medicare, and yet we can't pay our bills now.
In less than 10 years, Social Security will be paying out more than it takes in, and it will only get worse as baby boomers retire in larger and larger numbers. By 2017, Social Security will not be helping to reduce our overall deficit, it will be adding to it. Our enormous Medicare deficits and other federal spending that also lie ahead will only make this situation worse.
The only issue that's more severe than this would be the idea that an Islamic fundamentalist would get his hands on or her hands on a nuclear weapon and use it against us. Beyond that, there's nothing that's more severe than this. This issue represents the potential fiscal meltdown of this nation, and it absolutely guarantees, if it's not addressed, that our children will have less of a quality of life than we've had, that they will have a government they can't afford, and that we will be demanding so much of them in the area of taxes that they will not have the money to send their kids to college or buy that home or just live a good quality of life.
Obviously, if the public doesn't understand, there's going to be no sense of urgency and no pressure on our colleagues or the White House to act. I thank this panel, and we'll stand in adjournment.
Right now, if you look at the federal budget, it's running a deficit, and it will probably run a deficit for the next several years. Those deficits are not off the charts. We've been there before. But what is really worrisome is the longer-run future. If you look at just 3 programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, the spending for those programs under current rules will rise very rapidly over the next few years, indeed for the foreseeable future. Longevity increases and rising medical care spending are symptoms of being a rich country. However, we've got to do something about it. Unless we're willing to raise taxes and keep on raising them, or close down the rest of the federal government, we've got a very big problem staring us in the face.
Jefferson went on record saying that it was immoral for one generation to load up the next generation with debt. In private life, we don't do that. A person goes to his grave and his debts go with him, more or less. But in public, we do. In public, we have the system whereby one generation can spend money before it's been earned. And it spends the money, and then somebody's got to pay that money in the future, and that somebody is the next generation. To me, that is an immoral situation, and it's not just immoral, it's just fundamentally wrong and mean for one generation to spend the next generation's money.
debt. I know, I am scaring people. That's the point, man. That's a scary issue.
You don't want to scare them away from us then. You want to scare
okay.
When we thought of the idea of starting CYA, the goal was to be the face of the generation that's going to be affected by national debt and to kind of try to put a human touch to it.
All I gotta say is talk to your congressman, talk to your senator, talk to the GD president.
I'm coming to you.
We gotta fix this problem.
It stinks. You know, our parents talk our ears off from the time we're 10 about financial responsibility. This is what you have to do. Don't get into credit card debt. You have to pay for what you buy. You have to save your money. And then the politicians who are supposed to represent your values and represent what you want, they aren't doing the same thing. They're telling you one thing and doing another thing.
Would you like to go on a date with me? No. Would you like to learn about the debt? Yes.
You kind of want to look at them and say, how can you not realize that this is going to damage our future?
I mean, this situation is comparable to my parents incurring serious credit card debt before I was born and through my entire lifetime, and then expecting me to pay for it at some point in the future. And that's insane.
We're not playing. We're not in a play. We are serious.
Whenever you talk to someone about the problem, they're always like, yeah, that's really interesting. That's awesome. That's about it. It's hard to really, really get kids inspired. But I think we're starting to do that. We're starting to get a lot of interest, especially with the 2008 election, and the youth starting to realize that they do have a voice, that kids are now starting to take the extra step. And that's really nice to see. It sort of gives you hope.
You know, there's this perception that, oh, the public doesn't care about these are just numbers, you know, it's boring stuff. When we go out and do our town hall meetings, people love it. What they're frustrated with is that they can't get straight answers from politicians, or they're told things that just don't make sense, like, oh, we can cut taxes and add a prescription drug benefit to Medicare, and, you know, instinctively people think, I don't think that really adds up, you know, but I mean, this guy is telling me that I can have it all, so, okay, all right, I'll vote. I'll vote for him.
Well, you get your motor running, head out on a highway, looking for adventure and whatever comes in our way. Well, tonight I'm gonna make it happen, take the world in a love embrace, fire up all of my guns and explode into space.
The Concord Coalition has never taken a position on big government versus small government. The point is we're running a completely schizophrenic tax and spending policy right now where we've got a big government spending program, a small government tax program, which is a recipe for deficits as far as the eye can see. You know, this isn't the most sophisticated chart you're ever going to see, but it illustrates the problem.
My name is Scott Spradling. I am a political